Hi, this is John Pettigrew, and you're listening to Talking Through My Hat, a podcast that explores bookish businesses, the fantastic people who create them, and what those people have learned. I'm a hat wearer, a recovering editor, and the creator of Future Proofs, enabling editors and authors to work better online. To find out more, visit wearefutureproofs.com or follow me on Twitter at John_Pettigrew. Welcome to this week's Talking Through My Hat. Today I'm talking with Ryan Morison, a serial entrepreneur with over 15 years of experience across 2 continents, developing and commercialising digital publishing solutions. From a digital reading ecosystem through a multi-channel content management solution to an award-winning direct sales platform. He's even run a successful crowdfunding campaign for a subscription-based website. So, welcome to the podcast, Ryan.
Thank you, John.
So you've set up, I say, businesses in South Africa and the UK, and I'm sure we'll talk a little later about what that's been like, but let's start by asking how you describe your current businesses. So that's Erudition and Informants, 2 at once.
Sure. Okay. So I'll start with Informants. Basically, it's a digital publisher of resources for musicians and music teachers. And the idea is to use technology to help them reach their full potential. And I mean, the music industry, particularly with regards to tuition, has been a little bit conservative. And, sort of examples, publishers are still putting DVDs in print books. And there's just, some really simple things that one can do now on the web. And so basically, we just wanted to take advantage of that.
Okay.
And then on the Erudition side, this is more of a business-to-business business as opposed to Informants, which is B2C. And Erudition provides publishers with tools that basically enable them to develop new routes to market and new revenue streams. Or in other words, you could say, find a life outside of Amazon or a complement to Amazon as opposed to too reliant on just one retailer for your digital products.
Okay. So, and you've done, that's 2 very different businesses, and you've done lots of other things in the past. Why? I always like to ask why you've set up your businesses. I suppose we should start by why did you first set up your own business, kind of back in the day?
Okay. Yes. So basically, I was actually studying music at university, and I had these grand aspirations of being a concert pianist. And then sort of the reality check of life sort of struck. I ended up with some injury problems, and then also realized that even without those injury problems, actually the odds of making a living performing were very slim. I mean, the joke going around was the difference between a musician and a large pizza is the latter feeds a family of 4. And So I also did teach, and I realized that if I didn't make it as a performer, I'd end up teaching. And although I enjoyed aspects of it, I don't think it was really my calling, and I didn't feel it was fair on students to be somebody who, this wasn't really what they wanted to be doing, teaching them. There's other people who just, have a calling for that. So I dropped out of university and then realized that in South Africa, the job market was not great because we were just in our transition from apartheid into democracy. So I set up a business, which was basically, it was, I wanted to set up a digital magazine publishing business, but actually and try to publish magazines, and was completely overly ambitious and tried to do too many things. But actually, the software that we built for publishing the magazines digitally turned out to be quite useful. It was effectively a precursor to EPUB in a way. It was very similar. It was sort of a very light reading application based on XHTML. We had things like personalization and all of that built in. And what we realized is that actually we could pivot that business and sell the software to institutions who were publishing content.
Okay. And when was this?
So this was around 2000. We started developing the software in 2001. Okay. We got our first clients in 2003. Okay. And that basically grew that business from there.
So it was a, I know something about music, let's try and do something like that, but I don't actually want to be a musician now.
Yes, and initially we were publishing music magazines, but then we actually pivoted entirely to a pure sort of software play, and had nothing to do with music then. And so effectively, I had completed the transition from an artist to an entrepreneur, and had fully sold my soul to capitalism.
So how did you end up? Obviously, there's a period of time in there, but how did you get kind of from there to starting Erudition and Informants? What was it that drove your current businesses?
Sure. Okay. And even though they are very different businesses, there's actually they are intertwined in various ways. So to answer that question, sort of jumping ahead, the company that I started in South Africa, we exited to a large media company called Naspers, who have assets all over the world, really. And I'd set up, part of the exit was I got the opportunity to run an incubator in-house there and to work on new products around monetizing digital content. And that was across books, newspapers, magazines, even music and some TV as well. Okay. And what then subsequently happened was I had an earnout there. A number of our little incubations were actually relatively successful, and the business did what I guess large businesses do, is they then sort of tried to formalize those and effectively suck the life out of them. Yeah. I had an earnout. I then left, and then what? But I was really excited. I had a wonderful opportunity there to try so many interesting things, and I had some really good resources. It was a really wonderful environment in many ways. And I wanted to take some of these ideas forward, particularly things that I had never really caught on. And a lot of it was around direct sales for publishers, and just finding new revenue models and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so I basically set up Erudition to try and take forward a lot of those concepts that I'd started working on under the auspices of that incubator. Yeah. And then also there were various tools and pieces of IP that they were not leveraging that I actually managed to take back. So effectively, Erudition was like an incubator, but my own one as opposed to one. So the downside, not the same funding and resources, but the upside, a lot more control.
Yeah, okay.
And then jumping to Informants, I realized that actually, well, there were two reasons for getting that going. The one was I had made this promise to myself that I wanted to get back into music in some shape or form, but I'd been struggling with injury. And then I realized that actually another way of doing this would be to find perhaps a slightly different way of being involved in music again. And I was quite excited about the idea of perhaps publishing some content. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I realized was I perhaps needed to put my money where my mouth was around all of these ideas that I thought were so fantastic around direct sales. And I thought, if I'm telling publishers they can do this, are they really going to believe me unless I try myself? So Informants was effectively almost like a showcase for a lot of the Erudition concepts. And the idea was to see if we could go and build from scratch a profitable digital-only or digital-first publisher with a global customer base. And to learn on that journey and see what does and doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so that's basically how those two came about.
Okay. And you've had, as you say, quite a few journeys. You've had businesses that have pivoted, you've kind of developed, you've seen businesses be swallowed by large companies. And in a sense, that kind of preempts the question. But one of the things I like to talk about is, do you find that your businesses follow the path you expect? Or, do things tend to take unexpected turns? And do you prefer it when it goes as planned? or are those unexpected turns part of the thing for you that you like?
No, so I'm probably not the typical entrepreneur in that I don't have the same risk profile around uncertainty. I don't like uncertainty too much. And I would definitely say it is the latter. The businesses just about never go the way that you expect them to. And I think part of just being able to enjoy the journey a bit more is just accepting that, and then seeing that sometimes things don't go the way you want, but actually sometimes that's better. And what you wanted, sort of what you wished for, that sort of Chinese curse was actually not what you wanted or what would have made you happy anyway. So actually, to answer your question, I actually find I am sort of consistently finding that things that I'm sure will work don't, things that I don't think will work do, and sometimes when I think something will work and it does, it's not for the reasons that I thought so, and it's actually really humbling. But I think that's just the way it is, And I think there's I'm quite at peace with that, and I actually I think tend to look at it with a degree of amusement, and I see that there's so many people who have had some success or something's worked for them. And then, there's always the story about how they had this foresight from the start. And I feel the more that I've learned or the more that I've experienced is that actually as human beings, we're incredibly limited in our ability to predict things. And and I think we sort of spend a lot of time telling ourselves how clever we are and how detailed our predictions are and how clever our models are and all of that.
Yeah.
Then reality tends to sort of just bring us down a level or two. And I guess it's quite an amusing process sometimes.
Yeah, I always wonder when you hear a lot of businesses and startups in particular talking about how they always knew what they were going to do. And we, as you say, people are really good at post facto rationalization.
Yes.
But dealing with the change as it happens is a lot harder. And I can relate to what you say about the expected risk profile of someone who sets up a business, who's an entrepreneur or whatever, is that they're actively seeking change and risk and this kind of stuff. And I think most people I've talked to seem to be quite risk averse, because I think part of running a successful business is minimizing risk. So you've got to be able to face up to it and say, actually, we don't want too much of that stuff. We want to try and plot a way through that's going to minimize that.
Yes. I mean, I found that, there's almost a disservice, I think, done to people who want to go on an entrepreneurial journey, and that there's all this glamour around these sort of high stakes, no prisoners routes, and sort of go big or go home, bet the farm every day. And I think it's a very small percentage of people who actually have a profile where they can do that without being utterly miserable and terrified.
Yeah.
And I don't think that every business needs to be the next unicorn to be viable in terms of being something that's worthwhile for you personally to be involved in and that can make a contribution to people around you. I mean, there's a place for, I think, businesses of all shapes and sizes, but I do feel that people tend to have, given all of the hype and publicity, people tend to have a very specific idea of what businesses should look like.
Yeah, it's that Silicon Valley perspective, isn't it? That, as you say, if you're not planning to build a business that's going to be, $100 billion in 3 years or something, then why are you trying? I think that's not actually what it's about for most of us. We have a problem we need to solve or a challenge we want to meet or whatever it is. It is an interesting thing.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to try and map the business path and the business that one is working on and its inherent risk profile with one's own personal profile. And I find so often I see such a misalignment of those things in other entrepreneurs that I meet. And I think that's a recipe for being really miserable.
I think that's the main thing, isn't it? Again, it's that part of that Silicon Valley profile that what they stress is that the danger is failure or the danger is not growing enough. But often, as you say, the danger is that you're going to have a really horrible time while you're running this business that you thought was going to be great.
Absolutely. And there's a great book that I read recently, which it's really simple but beautifully done. I think it's published by Profile. It's called Winning Without Losing. And they also talk about what happens when you win and you actually lose. And I've seen that too as well. There's so many people that I sort of looked up to or sort of almost coveted their success, only to find that actually in many ways it was quite hollow as well, because it had come at great cost in terms of their personal lives and so many other things. And I think that it's also a case of you could not be successful and miserable. You can also be successful and miserable.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is, I say it's the pursuit of wealth at all costs is not actually conducive to happiness or a good life.
Exactly. Yes.
But you're mentioning there a book you'd read recently. Again, one thing is really interesting as we try and map this course through risk and to do the things that we are best suited to and stuff. I mean, how do you go about learning to do all that stuff better, to run a business better? Are you the sort of person, do you tend to just try stuff and see what works? Or are you I'm going to read all the books and try and find, the answers in there? Or, I mean, what works for you?
Sure. So I love reading books and websites, and I'm always inspired by them. And I've always been a voracious reader. Uh-huh. However, I've realized that that can be a problem in itself, because knowledge is pretty much useless if you're not sure how to apply it. So in terms of my sort of approach to trying to improve and learn how to run my businesses better, I tend to adopt very much a just-in-time approach, because I'm interested in ideas and so I'll read any book on business, but it's not be relevant to me at that point in time. And actually, so I tend to try and look more proactively in saying, okay, these are some things that I need to learn about at this point in time. And so what's a good resource for that? However, I'd also say that actually, I don't want to sound disparaging around books and sites and things, but I feel that there's a sort of a wisdom that's needed to apply that knowledge. And I started getting really worried when I was doing interviews and things a few years ago, and people would describe themselves as TED Talk junkies. And they'd say that they'd listen to every TED Talk on running a business. And there's something that worried me about that because, you really do need to try something to be able to learn. There's only so much you can do sort of by reading or listening. And I mean, reading and listening and all of that is a great compliment, but you need to be learning actively. And the other thing that I find as well is actually one of the ways of knowing how to apply things is having a bit of self-awareness. And, I don't feel that you get a lot of that from knowledge. I feel that comes from other things and maybe sort of interacting with other people and other entrepreneurs and all of that. So I found actually there are a lot of people who spent a lot of time learning and reading and absorbing knowledge, but you found that it was very difficult for them to actually apply that in the real world. So I tend to find that, I mean, I get very carried away because I love ideas and information and all of that. But I find that actually I tend to learn a lot more by just trying to develop a bit more self-awareness. And so much of that comes from just interactions with other people.
Yeah, I quite like that concept of just-in-time learning. If you're in the tech world, just-in-time is quite a thing that developers like to go on about, but it's quite, as a way of educating yourself, that's quite good. But I just say it's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. You've got to pull the ideas, but you've actually got to try it out in the real world and learn for yourself, don't you?
Absolutely. And I mean, to be fair, also, I guess people do learn in different ways and you've got to find what works for you. But something that I realized was I did accountancy at school and I thought it was basically a crime against humanity that people were forced to learn this. I found it so dry and boring and unengaging. And then when I was about to exit a business, and we had to go through a due diligence, and we were sort of gearing up to exit. And so I realized now this accounting stuff is important, but it all was very boring to me and I didn't quite understand it. So I got somebody on board as a kind of a mentor who was an FD of a quoted listed company at one stage. And she put together resources for me that were very much just in time, based on what I needed to know at that point in time in the context of my own business. And it was incredible because I went from hating the subject to loving it and being fascinated by it. And feeling like it's not the same as studying it at university, but I felt like I could carry myself and be confident in a conversation with, an auditor or somebody doing a due diligence. And so that just-in-time approach worked really well for me there. Whereas by itself, learning about the topic, I personally found I didn't really engage with it.
Yeah, it's interesting actually thinking about that. I mean, I remember when I was at school, and my children are at secondary school at the moment, and it is this thing of a subject that you see no earthly use for is not likely to be very interesting to you, but once you see an application that's relevant to you, you sort of, aha, now I get it. Now it's interesting. I mean, my wife teaches maths, and she sees this quite a lot. It's this thing of what the classic, why do I need to learn algebra? Well, there are reasons, and as soon as you run up against one of them, you go, haha, now I need this. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that maths example is a good one too. I mean, I found at school I did physics and maths, and I did not very well at maths, and I did reasonably well at physics. My maths teacher told me I was stupid, and my physics teacher told me I had a knack for physics and maths. But it was because for me, physics was a practical application.
Yes.
And I kind of almost wish that at that time that maths was taught that way because I actually absolutely loved the subject.
Yeah. So how do you take that learning process and you look forward? If you think about the next 5 years or the next 50 years for your businesses, I mean, do you think in a long-term fashion about strategy and how you're going to ensure your business is still around then? And if so, what are the sorts of things you think about?
It's okay. So that is actually one of my favorite topics. The concept of strategy and how do you deal with strategy in a world where things are changing? You can't predict and control everything.
Yeah.
So actually, just touching on the previous conversation, one book if I had to say one book that has had the biggest impact on my business or approach to business, is a book called The Origin of Wealth by Eric Beinhocker.
Okay.
Now, the title is a bit misleading. It's not about getting rich. It's more about how you create value. And it provides a fascinating insight into strategy and being responsive to change and accepting that the models that we've had around business and the economy are very much around a closed system. And actually, this isn't a closed system. So things don't behave predictably. Human beings aren't rational. There's too many variables and things to factor in. So if in terms of creating a business where there's longevity, I would say that my approach to strategy then is about having what I would call an emergent strategy and being responsive. And so very similar, and you will know this, in the software game, people have agile where they, have iterations and they have an idea of what they want to build and they do a sprint. I have a very similar approach to strategy, and it's something that I worked on in the incubator and had a lot of fun working with, because on the one hand, it was a big company with, I think, well over 40,000 staff.
Okay.
So there had to be a strategy. I couldn't just go, well, we'll just think on our feet. But at the same time, it was such a fast-moving environment. That incubator launched, and then the iPad came out, and so many things happened.
Yeah.
So it was a case of, it's not that you don't have a plan, but you're constantly formulating your plan, testing it in the market, and refining your approach iteratively.
Yeah.
And sort of balancing, on the one hand, being quite determined and focused and clear on what you're trying to do, but the other hand, being sort of quite introspective, questioning, critical. And I think that, to me, is the only way that I can imagine trying to approach this, because I can't say what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years' time, let alone 6 months.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the only way of building a robust business with longevity.
Yeah. So as you think about, you mentioned introspection, this kind of thing, what is it that you personally find hardest about running a business? And how do you overcome that? Because, there are things we all find hard.
Yeah, I think what I find quite difficult is that, there's all of these sort of personal traits and habits and things that one's often not even aware of that can often be not very useful. And then, if you think you're reasonably intelligent, you can sort of justify why you have to do the way that feel comfortable to you.
Yeah.
And actually you need a bit more of a reality check. And I think what's really difficult being an entrepreneur is knowing what behavior or approach to adopt at what point in time. And so I'll give an example of how I sort of illustrate this. I think entrepreneurs actually have to be schizophrenic, because on the one side, you have to be passionate to get up and make something happen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've also got to be able to be critical and objective, and to know when to listen to feedback. And, I've never known anyone who's gotten anywhere without having that grit and determination and passion. But at the same time, I've seen so many people really hurt themselves by holding on too long and not knowing when to let go, or when to change course.
Yeah.
And I think for me it comes down to, and I mean, I say this is my working theory, because I certainly wouldn't purport to have this mastered. It is having a degree of self-awareness. Self-awareness is useful to a point. So you can meditate and you can sort of go for a walk up the mountain or whatever it is and look back on yourself and review your week and see how you're doing and be aware of your habits. But actually, the problem with that, though, is it still really just gives you a front row seat to the car crash that is us humans trying to deal with all of our failings.
Yeah.
And so what I find very valuable is, and I've done this in various capacities, is being mentored, having mentors or coaches and things like that, and also even being involved in providing mentorship as well. And I find just working with people or interacting with people who they know enough to be able to provide some useful insights. So they've got some context, but they're not as close to it as you are, and they're not so caught up in your personal package and all of that.
Yeah.
I find it so valuable. And it's not just, so I've had a few people that I've been so fortunate to have worked with throughout my career who've done that for me, who've mentored me and coached me. But I've also found that in doing that with other people, I actually learn more about myself, I think, in actually just providing that sounding board to other people. So I found that something that sort of really helps with that challenge of just knowing, what to do at what time, and how to avoid falling into one's habits when they're not necessarily useful.
Yeah. So, what have you learned about yourself from running the business, from having this introspective, this learning approach? I mean, it's been a while, I know, since you started running businesses, but what have the businesses themselves taught you?
So there's quite a few things that they've taught me that I guess I prefer not to have known. That's, I guess that's life. So on a slightly more critical side, I realized that I love complexity, and I'm trying to understand complex problems. But I've realized that can be a failing in itself, because I always think that for an idea to be elegant, it needs to be complicated. A product needs to be complicated. The strategy needs to be complicated.
Yeah.
And underneath that, I think is a very valid observation, is that the world is a complex place.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that your solutions always have to be complicated. In fact, so I've had to learn and accept that actually sometimes there's an incredible art to coming up with simple solutions within a complex environment. And then the other things that I've learned about myself are, and so at a slightly more personal level, is that actually the success in itself and financial success, while it's important for a business to be viable and all of that, I need to feel that the journey was worthwhile. And I realized that in my business that was successful, where we exited, had we not exited, not been successful, I would have felt like, other than some learnings and school fees paid, I would have literally have wasted years of my life. The journey was not worth it. I was miserable. I had no life outside of that job. I was working 70 hours a week plus. And really unhealthy and all of that. So I realized that from all of this, that actually I want to be doing things that even if they don't work out, the journey was worthwhile. So if I end up in the wrong place, as long as I enjoyed the scenery along the way. And so much of that for me is also learning that I really take a lot of joy in creating things. And yes, I mean, they need to be viable and tested in the market. And there's a wonderful validation that you get from that when something works. But it also needs to feel like it was something worthwhile.
Oh, excellent. And what is then the thing that keeps you coming back to it every day?
So following on from that, the sort of that joy of creating things, but that's quite a sort of what's the word, individual or solitary pursuit. But I think what I would say in these businesses, the thing that keeps me back is really the people that I so fortunate to be able to interact with. So not only, I think something that I love about the publishing industry is that it gives you a wonderful opportunity to work with and interact with people who I would choose to spend time with regardless of any commercial sort of activity or engagement. And I think that's really wonderful. You can't always say that. I mean, many people might say that they like the people they work with, but they wouldn't necessarily choose to interact with them if they weren't working with them. Whereas I'm just fascinated and so inspired by so many of the people that I meet and work with. And I find it's just such a wonderful way to be spending your time.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much. That's a fantastic note to end our conversation on. Thanks very much for your time, Ryan.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Really enjoyed talking with you, John.
This was Talking Through My Hat, a podcast by John Pettigrew, founder of We Are Future Proofs. Please let me know your thoughts by leaving a review at Apple Podcasts or by commenting on the website, myhat.wearefutureproofs.com. You can subscribe to this channel at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme music is from hooksounds.com.